In this video, we're going to look at basic character animation. We're going to create this simple walking figure out of basic geometric shapes. We're going to cover keyframing, parenting, the use of null objects, and crucially the pan behind tool. This will build on what we covered in previous videos covering keyframing, but we're going to put it into practice in a simple basic character walking loop. This is going to cover the things we've done previously involving keyframes, but we're just going to put them into practice involving a basic character, and we're going to create this simple walking loop. So let's get started. So once you've downloaded the project files we're going to be working with, the first thing we need to do is import them into After Effects. Now there's a few files here, and we're going to take Tidyman Exploded. Because this is an Illustrator file, we're going to have a few options. We can either bring all of those different layers as a composition, or we can bring them in as flattened footage. If we're importing as footage, this will be essentially bringing in as a flat image, like a JPEG style image. When doing so, we can either merge all the layers or select individual layers that we want to bring in. If you, as we're going to do, importing it as a composition, then it'll just bring in all of the layers and we get each layer as an individual asset in itself. We're also going to ensure that document size is set, and we're going to click OK. Once we've imported, you can now see that not only do we have a composition, but we have a bin with all of the individual layers, so we can get access to each constituent part of your composition. I'm going to open up the composition itself, and you'll see it's a slightly odd shape and aspect ratio. That's because it's based on the file size and shape of the Illustrator file that we've imported. Now, we're going to use this as what's also called a nested sequence. And for that, we just want our character walking. So the element of the rubbish and the bin, we don't need just yet, so we'll select and delete those. Now, if we have a look, we have what's called an exploded character. Each individual limb or portion of a limb has been separated out with a portion to allow it to overlap. The more movement and more fine that movement needs to be, the more elements we need. But this is a very simple animation, a very simple character where the legs and arms and head and body are simple geometric shapes. They're going to move and swing back and forth. So we don't need that many constituent parts. Now, the movement for each of these parts is going to be a pretty simple and well-timed rotation, as they're going to swing. But if I take my rotation tool and select, for example, the right leg, as I rotate it, it will pivot on a central point called the anchor point. And that isn't what we want our leg to pivot on. We want our leg to pivot at the top, at the hip. So for each element in the body, we're going to move the anchor point to somewhere that makes logical sense. Once we've done that, we're going to move each element so that it's positioned correctly to begin our animation. So we're essentially constructing our maquette. To do this, we're going to use the pan behind tool. It allows us to select the anchor point for any given layer and move it to a different location. And then when we use a rotate tool, it will now pivot on that anchor point. So the element is going to pivot and rotate around a much more logical location. So we now have to repeat this process of placing the anchor point for each individual element of our character. I'm going to quickly repeat that for the left leg, the right arm, the left arm, the head, which we're going to pivot just below it because you'd pivot on the neck, and the body itself, we're going to pivot at the base of the torso as it would rock on the hips. Where I'm going to position each of the legs so they're now both also in a logical location. So now our character is partially rigged, but if we want to move it around, if I took the body for example and moved it, just that layer is going to move, which we would expect. But we want to be able to move the entire character together as one. And that is where parenting is going to come in. Parenting is when we can create links between layers so that if I position and rotate one, layers that are linked to that layer will move with it. So for example, if I come down to the layers, you'll see we have lots of options, one of which is parent and link, and they'll all be set to none to begin with. If I open that up, I will see every different layer. Next to it, you'll also see this curly Q pick whip. The pick whip allows you to take the layer, for example, the head, and click and drag it to another layer, for example, the body. The head is now linked to the body, so if I was to take the body now and click and drag it, the head comes with it. So now I logically go through all the lists of my layers and link everything to the correct parent, which in most of these cases is the body. I'll put the left arm and the right arm also to the body. But I'm not going to put the legs, and I'll show why. If I parent everything to the body, and say for example I want to pivot the torso so the character is bending over, the legs will pivot with it. So to remedy this, we're going to use what's called a null object. A null object is essentially an empty object. It has all the assets and variables of an object, just no visual details. There's no visual information. It is a ghost. And whilst it may be a ghost, because we can perform all the same actions with a null object, it becomes incredibly useful as a tool when we get ourselves in situations like this. To create a null object, I go to the Layer drop-down menu, New, Null Object. I've created my null object, so now I'm going to position both the object and its anchor point in a logical location. I will then parent the body to the null as well as the legs. So now if I pivot the body, it will rotate on the hips, but the legs will stay static. I can pivot the legs and they stay static, but if I grab the null object, I can move my whole character around. So the head bone's connected to the body is connected to the null, and the legs are also connected to the null, thus giving us our fully rigged character. With our character rigged, we're now ready to animate. Now this is going to be a simple walk cycle. So we're going to go from a standing point, complete all the movements that makes a single step, back to that point. So we can then loop that movement. The easiest way of doing this is to copy and paste keyframes. This allows us to repeat the movement precisely so that the loop will be perfect. This is quite simple and actually speeds the process of creating this kind of simple stylized animation very easily and quite quickly. So let's start with the right leg. I'll open up the right leg layer, and in the transform options I'll find rotation. I will ensure my playhead is at the start of the timeline, and I'm going to turn rotation on. Using my rotate tool, I'm then going to put the leg at the furthest extreme of one step for that leg. I'm then going to move my playhead forward 10 frames. I can tell I've moved 10 frames as the time code clock down here tells me frames, seconds, minutes, hours. As I move my playhead through, you'll see that count up and down. I can also select on it and manually type to get a very precise point. So if my playhead precisely 10 frames on, I'll then move the leg to the furthest extreme of the backswing of a single step. And then move forward 10 frames again, so 10 plus 10 is 20. I'll then move on 10 frames again, so 10 plus 10 is 20. And I need my leg to go back to the exact same point that it began. So the easiest way of doing this is to select a keyframe, edit, copy, then edit and paste. And that is pasted that keyframe where the playhead is. So now that leg goes from one point, swings back, and then swings back up to the exact same point again. Now I need to repeat this process for the entirety of my composition. However, that's actually quite quick and it will speed up exponentially because this keyframe and this keyframe are the same. I can select these two. I'll go Edit, Copy. I'll then move on 10 frames, which 20 frames plus 10 actually takes me to the 5th frame of the next second. And I'll paste again. I can select these 4 because the last frame and the first frame are the same. Move forward 10 frames. So 15 frames plus 10 takes me to 0 because the time base is 25, making 1 second. And as you see, I can just keep on copying and pasting and moving forward 10 frames. And that way I'm very quickly getting an awful lot of precisely repeating movement. Now let's have a look at this. Now that leg is going to move metronomically. Every point in that movement is going to be exactly the same, which isn't how someone moves, even if they are moving as stylized. And every frame will have the same amount of change, so the movement is not going to change its speed from one frame to the next. You're going to move exactly the same rate. Organic things don't work like that. People speed up and slow down their movement depending on where they are in a single movement and what they're doing. So I'm going to select all my keyframes. I'm going to control click on them, go to my keyframe assist, and I'm going to select easy ease. So now as the leg gets to the zenith of its movement, it'll slow down and speed up through the middle of the swing. I might think that that movement is good, but it's happening too quickly. So I might select all my keyframes, hold down my Alt key, and then I can drag them out. So now that movement is happening more slowly. Now I could be really pleased with that movement, but I now need to replicate it exactly with the other leg. And again, the easiest way is to select all my frames, Edit, Copy. I'm going to use my skip back and forth frame buttons to get to the very beginning frame. I'm going to go to the left leg. I'm going to open up the left leg, select the rotation, and I'm going to paste. And now they're moving exactly the same. But that isn't quite what we actually wanted. We wanted the same movement, just out of time. So when one leg was the extreme in one direction, the other leg was in the extreme in the opposite direction. Well, that is very easy to remedy because all we have to do is move so that this keyframe is in line with this keyframe. So I can drag them down. And you'll now see them moving and pivoting at the exact same rate, going back and forth. The left leg needs a little bit of a reposition, but that's not a problem. Just kind of put it back where it wants to be. And we now have our walking. Now, that is perfectly crisp and sharp the entire time. So we might want to put a little bit of motion blur onto the elements that are moving, such as my legs, and turning the motion blur on, just to kind of smooth it out a little bit and make it a little bit easier on the eye. Now we have a little bit of lag here as it's loading because my preview resolution is currently set to full. Now I don't need that, so I'm going to drop it to third so that it plays back more smoothly, and the quality will drop, but I don't need to see that full quality at the preview point. Dropping our preview quality does not affect the final quality of the output, only at this stage. I'm also going to shrink my work area so that I'm only working in a smaller area. I'm going to trim my comp to my work area as well. Now I'm going to repeat this process with other elements as well, such as the arms and the head, to add additional movement. Now this process will be the same, but one thing I will notice that the left and the right arm, their rotation as a start point is very different. So we're going to repeat that process with the left and right arm. How much you want other elements to swing and move is up to you. You can add a head bob or an upper body kind of twist as well. But again, that is up to you as the animator of how much movement you want in your character. So as you can see, I've added movement to the arms and a little head bob as well. However, the character is still static on the screen. They're not moving from left to right, so they are just flailing in fresh air. They're also in a composition that is the wrong resolution and aspect ratio for our final delivered video. Our client, hypothetically, has asked for a standard 16:9 full HD frame. And this character is going to walk across it on a simple coloured background. So we need to nest this sequence in another sequence. Nesting allows us to take lots of different parts in a single sequence so that they're compartmentalized, organize and animate and keyframe them independently, and then place them in a larger, more complex composition. This allows us to group things together in a more simple and holistic way, but sometimes with some effects it is vital and only possible to create that outcome by nesting or pre-composing certain elements into another sequence and having that sequence nested within your main sequence. Now this is a technique we're going to work on a lot over the coming lessons. However, in this example, it's a fairly straightforward nesting. So we're going to start off by creating a fresh composition. So I'm going to go Composition, New Comp. And in here we have all of our presets, and we're going to ensure we have the HDTV 1080 standard selected. This will give us a 16:9 aspect ratio frame at a standard full HD resolution. And I'm going to click OK. Now it's blank and empty, so I need a coloured background. So I'm going to go to Layer, New, I'm going to select Solid. We're going to have this lovely shade of minty cyan, and this is going to be our background colour which our character is going to walk across. I'm going to lock that layer because I don't want anything to happen to it. And I'm going to come up to my project panel. And in my project panel, I'll see all the individual elements that I used to make up my tidy man. But you'll also see the composition which we just animated. I'm going to drag that in as if it was a standard asset. And After Effects will see that like a normal video clip or a normal asset of any kind. It will see it no differently to a JPEG or a video clip. Now because this is a nested sequence, if I go back to the original sequence and make a change, such as make the body invisible, that will automatically be carried across to our main composition. And this is where the power of nesting a composition comes in, because I can pull things together, have them in one space, edit and adjust them, and have that come through in the main sequence, and have that come through in the main composition, and have a very tidy timeline in both examples and both separate comps, so that everything isn't too complicated. There's not too many layers in any one given space. So I'm going to give him his arm back. And he's still walking in air, flailing around. So we want to make the character move from off-screen left across the screen to off-screen right. So I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to take my nested composition. I'm going to pull it outside of my video frame. As you can see, he's still very much there. We can see his bounding box, but he's not. He's still very much there. We can see his bounding box. He's just not visible within our edit. So I'm going to place him in his start position, place my playhead in its start position. So I'm going to start by putting my character off screen on the left in his starting position, go to his layer, open up the transform options, and this is a very simple position keyframe. Move forward in time, reposition the element. If I want a perfectly straight line, if I hold down the shift key, it will lock it to horizontal or vertical, and we can play it through. If I wanted this to go slower, I would simply move the keyframes apart, and you then walk at a slower pace. If I then wanted to have a motion blur around the entirety of the figure as he moved, I would simply turn that on for that asset and for the comp in the exact same way as I would have done before. And we'll have that nice soft edge of motion blur so it's not too harsh on the eye. And with that done, that's us. So in this video we covered a limited animated character. So in this video we've created a walking loop in a kind of a limited animation style. We covered parenting of layers. We covered the pan behind tool, changing that anchor point. We covered null objects and copying and pasting and adjusting keyframes en masse. We also looked at nested compositions and how that can be a really useful tool to kind of organize and compartmentalize parts of more complex animations and compositions. Hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you in the next one.